Greetings. I'd like to welcome everyone in our audience today. We are very grateful that you have chosen to share from your busy day with us. We know your time is valuable, and we'll honor that today with what I'm confident will be an engaging discussion. Once again, our topic today is fraud in focus, AI, identity, and the new fraud economy in 2026. Our sponsor is Alloy. Our host is American Banker, and my name is Mike Sisk. I'm a contributing editor at American Banker, and I will be your moderator today. And I am very, very pleased to introduce our two speakers here today. We have with us Teresa Squitieri, a director of fraud strategy at Ally Bank. Teresa has been in the banking industry for over 25 years with a focus in retail banking fraud for over 20 years. During her career, she worked for Commerce and TD Bank for roughly 10 years, investigating retail banking fraud and managing complex fraud investigations, directly working with law enforcement for prosecution. And after her career at TD Bank, Teresa worked for JPMorgan Chase for roughly a year in the investigative space prior to moving to Ally Bank, where she has held various roles over the past 10 years. At Ally, Teresa has had several operational and strategic roles, including fraud program manager, director of fraud countermeasures, and head of fraud strategy. During her tenure, she has worked to progress the fraud program at Ally through operational leadership and reorganization and implementing key technology and policy control gaps. We're very, very pleased to have Teresa with us here today. And joining her is Sarah Seguin. Sarah is the principal advisor on fraud and identity risk at Alloy, the leading identity decisioning platform. Sarah brings 17 years of experience in the banking industry to Alloy. And prior to joining the company, she was the head of enterprise fraud strategy for KeyBank. Sarah has deep-rooted experience within various fraud risk domains, including deposits, payments, online activity, cards, risk, and identity. And definitely very honored to have Sarah with us here today as well. Just before we kind of jump into things, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We do have time at the end for Q&A. And so you can put your question into the queue throughout the hour. You don't have to wait until the end. So we definitely encourage you to just get that question in there as it occurs to you. And if for some reason we run out of time and we don't get to a question you've asked, we'll definitely follow up after the program. So please ask away. We very much want to hear from you. We also have a couple polls today, and I always encourage 100% participation. We do share the results live with everyone here, so it's a great way to see where everyone else stands on the issue we've come together to discuss. So if you can weigh in on those polls, that'd be fantastic. All right, and so let's just quickly take a look at the agenda here. We're going to go through the state of fraud in 2026, innovations in fraud prevention, then predictions for the year, and then we'll have that Q&A as I just mentioned. Excellent. So why don't we kick things off here with our first poll? And this is going to be kind of a nice way of sort of level setting for our discussion here today. So I'm just going to read the question, read the answers, and hopefully that gives everyone enough time to make their selection. So what are the biggest fraud prevention priorities for your organization in 2026? Is it making investments into enhancements for fraud detection strategies, or investing in new solutions such as AI, growing a fraud team, or improving fraud controls to offer new financial products and increase customer acquisition? So I will just hold that open another moment or two to collect as many votes here as I can get. And I've got a handy tool. I can see how many people are participating, and we've got a really nice number of folks participating, number and percentage of folks participating. So appreciate that. And okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the results here so that we can move along. I know we got a lot of great content to get through here. So here we go. So the first results of this first poll. So 40% of you said making investments into enhancements for fraud detection strategies. That was kind of the leader there, followed by improving fraud controls to offer new financial products and increase customer acquisition, 27%, 22% investing in new solutions such as AI, and 11% growing our fraud team. Excellent. Thank you for that input. And Sarah, let me just kick it over to you. First of all, welcome. And I wanted to ask whether the results of this poll are, in keeping with what you expected, or were there any surprises here?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. Actually, in line with what I expected, the investments into enhancements from a fraud detection standpoint, we are seeing those proactive investments not only being made this year, moving forward, we've seen this ramp up over the past few years. But what we'll definitely take a look at today, too, is how improving of the fraud controls to increase customer acquisition is really starting to come to the forefront on an intersection between fraud and the line of business partners. So we'll take a look at that today. It'll be interesting to see if that were to change, Mike, if we look into next year. So we'll keep an eye on that one.
Fantastic. Um, and yeah, so I'll kick it over to you, Sarah, if you'd like to just take control of the slides here.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. Super excited that Teresa is joining us as well. We're going to kick off with the State of Fraud report. A little bit of background. Alloy completes an annual fraud survey. And what this is looking at leaders ranging from C suite executives, VPs, directors, and really ranging from fintechs to regionals, super regionals, credit unions, all the way to enterprise institutions to survey them and understand what are the challenges you're facing today and where are you making investments into the future? What are your predictions to really help level set what's happening in the industry from a financial organization perspective? So, a little bit of background on what we're going to look at today before we get into predictions. So, I'm excited to dig in here and Teresa really understand what your thoughts are. Some of the top three statistics that we saw in our report this year was related to the increase in fraud events. So I think about the 67% of respondents indicated fraud events are increasing. That's not necessarily surprising. So I look at that and I say, that tracks, right? 67%, we would expect that, maybe even a little more. Teresa, what is your gut check there? When we think about 67%, is this what you expected? Is this a surprise? Did you expect it to be lower or higher?
Yeah, I'm actually really surprised to see 67%. I would have expected this number to be much higher. We're seeing so much sophistication from, the scam side of things and the ATO side of things. So I'm kind of shocked to see 67%. I would have thought that that would have been, 80, 90% if I'm being honest. 67 is a little on the low side from, what I would have expected to see.
Okay, so that's really interesting because then if we look at the next statistic, 91% of respondents are noticing more financial crimes being committed with AI technologies. So on the one hand, I think about that statistic and I think that's not surprising. What I do find surprising is that leaders are saying we are tracking it. We know it's happening, which I think is great news for the industry. Uh, but when we start to look at that 91%, did you expect it to be that high? Or is that higher than what you thought, even from a tracking perspective?
It is really higher than I expected from a tracking perspective. I'm kind of curious as responders were answering this particular question as to whether or not they were kind of considering the AI that the scammers were using to send phishing emails and SMSs, just because. We don't see those typical hallmarks that we've seen in the past around misspellings and grammatical errors. Communications that our customers are receiving are better and better. They have the same tone as legitimate communications. So I wonder if they were really focusing on that part of using AI when they were responding to this particular question.
So that's really interesting because when we look at that, what feels out of balance to me is the 67% say fraud events are increasing. 91% are saying they're seeing AI, and we know that AI is going to help in mass scale, right? And be better, and as you stated, get the tone right, right, and have more complex. I would expect those numbers to be more in line. So to me, that feels a little out of balance. Do you think that the 67% we're thinking it's probably underreported, right? And that could be a reason why they feel out of balance. So would you expect that fraud event to really probably be more like an 80 plus percent?
I really do. I really think that that would be closer to 80. 80, 90%.
Fair enough. Now, let's take a look at the 94%. Fraud risk is the number one consideration when we're looking at what new products to offer customers. So I love that number. I love that it's high, right? I think for those and many on the call, I'm certain they have been in the fraud industry or banking industry for a long time. And what, if you've lived through it, you know that it's been really hard for fraud and risk to sometimes have a seat at the table when you think about new products and features and functionality. So love to see it's at 94%. But it does beg the question, why now? Why are we seeing it's great and I love it, but why do we see the shift where now fraud is at the forefront and part of the consideration? Is it recognition where that there should be proactive loss avoidance? Could it be regulator driven? Is it internal risk teams that really have earned that seat at the table? What are your thoughts there?
I think a lot of it is feedback from our customers. So I think kind of a concept of fraud prevention as a service is coming to the surface, where customers expect a certain level of friction, and they're kind of reframing how friction is viewed. Friction, really is the back end need for an operational team to place a restriction on an account, require a customer to call in, versus empowering customers during their online journeys or digital journeys to remediate those concerns as the activity is happening. So I think that a lot of product teams are also starting to see the importance and the safety of launching their product. Feedback has been received that customers like that, and they're really putting a renewed focus on ensuring that the bank is protecting them by keeping their money safe, but also protecting them from themselves in some circumstances. So, with everything that's in the news at all times regarding scams, and seems like almost every day we're hearing about a new customer who is, lost all of their life savings as a result of a scam. There's really a renewed focus on ensuring that as new products and services are launched, they're really being launched safely and with the right control environment in place. And also, I don't think anybody wants to launch a product that needs to be then, turned off because of fraud losses or poor customer experience because of those fraud losses.
Yeah, Teresa, that's a great call out. I love that you brought up fraud as a service and that you're seeing this shift over time, right? With consumers, they're being heard, they're at the forefront. Because I think in banking, a lot of it is we know that it's the voice of the customer, but sometimes just through business, unfortunately that can get lost. So love to hear that you're seeing in the industry. It's really neck and neck coming to the forefront. Organizations are listening, and that's the part of the shift that we're seeing. So when we think about fraud types, right? The for reference, we're going to move to the right side. And the question here to our on our survey was, what type of fraud events did you see most frequently by case volume in the last 12 months? We know synthetic is a problem, but synthetic is leading the pack here. That is not what I necessarily expected to see. I already heard you bring up account takeover. So what is your initial thought there with what is leading?
I completely agree. I was very surprised to see synthetic fraud at the forefront here and not see first party fraud anywhere on this list. Um, just because, we've seen a ton of growth in first party fraud over the years, especially as we've gotten better at identifying things like identity theft and identity related concerns. So I think that that was probably the biggest surprise to me to see synthetic fraud up there. Not at all surprised to see ATO. Not at all surprised to see authorized push payments. And we all know that the scam environment is running rampant, but it was very surprising for me to see or synthetic identity as the top.
Yeah, I agree with you. So if we were to think of, let's think of September, October, and we look at this stat again, Do you see first party coming into that top three? Do you see ATO taking over number one? What would your prediction be there?
Yeah, I think it also kind of comes down to how people are responding to the survey in terms of volume or losses. ATO losses are, always the highest losses because they're being targeted because, they have higher balances. But I would expect to see first party fraud emerge into the top fraud types for sure.
Okay, fair enough. So definitely something we will continue to keep an eye on. So, Teresa, when the next one we're going to look at is when fraud is being detected. So what's really interesting to me, the question that was asked was ultimately, right, in as part of your customer life cycle, where do you most commonly detect fraud? And what we see here, and I'll tell you again, this one surprised me a little bit because I am a firm believer that you really have to have detection all throughout the life cycle, right? And but onboarding is so incredibly important because it's the front door, it's your gate. If your gate is wide open, then your sheer volume, right, and what you expect to detect thereafter is going to be pretty high. So I usually expect onboarding to be pretty high, but here we actually saw a year over year decline in in fraud being detected at onboarding. The first thing that then came to mind was first party. You've already brought up first party, so let's dig in there. How much do you think first party is playing into that decline we're seeing year over year?
Yeah, I think first party comes into play very heavily here, especially if you're the first institution that's being hit by this first party fraudster. A lot of the solutions for first party fraud are looking at consortium data, they're looking at FCRA data. But if you are the first financial institution, you're not going to have those signals available to you at the time that the customer's onboarding. And you really are reliant on transactions to identify that. I also think that some of the decrease on the onboarding side might be the result of, pressure around customer growth strategies, and wanting to get those customers in the door so that you can then later, detect post account opening with, other strategies that you might have in place to prevent money movement once the account is open.
That's really interesting, Teresa, because then there is that quantity over quality, right? Or reliance on your tools, as you stated, post onboarding to really catch so that you can let them in the door and then monitor. So really interesting
Mhm.
insight there. The other piece that caught my eye was the 7% where fraud is being detected after the fact, right? So great to see that in real time. We love to see that high number. We like to see it steady year over year. But when you think about there's a 7% shift. So, did that 7% shift come from the onboarding bucket? But really, after now fraud being detected, after it's occurring, I'm thinking new schemes, new trends, maybe that strategies are not detecting, models are starting to deteriorate, et cetera. What is the first thing that comes to mind where you're seeing this shift in fraud being detected after the fact?
I think for me, it's really in the sophistication that we're seeing around ATO and scams, especially the imposter scam activity that we're seeing, where customers are involved in the overall completion of the transaction. And sometimes customers are also not necessarily being completely upfront because they are intimidated or scared. So, I mean, some customers are even approving these payments when outbound phone calls are being made, when they're being questions, and then later coming back, sometimes months later, and saying, actually, I was a victim of a scam. On the ATO side, remote access is becoming a huge issue, because a lot of the hallmarks, the traditional hallmarks of identifying ATO, just aren't present. So we're not seeing the typical abnormal device, which in the past was very heavily reliant on because the activity appears to be coming from the true customer. So a lot of the times, I think those are being identified after the event versus earlier in upstream processes.
Which definitely is going to make it that much harder to detect because the historical signals that maybe you relied on and organizations relied on, they have to quickly pivot, right, in order to detect that.
Yeah,
Very
a lot of
challenging.
need yeah, a lot of need to kind of train associates and change their mindset when looking for ATO signals because of that. So, really important that we're continuing to adapt to our detection strategies and our associate upfront first line training to make sure that we're really focusing that that is not the singular thing that we need to be looking at when identifying ATO.
Great call out. So I'm hearing training, very robust, holistic view, not just looking for like that one signal that will tell you whether it is good or bad. You really have to look at the whole picture.
Absolutely. Looking at behavioral signals, abnormal transaction amounts, interacting through channels that, are not typical for this customer are so critical when identifying ATO these days just because of the various man in the middle attacks, phishing websites, remote access. It's just not easy to identify through just, this is a typical device for a customer anymore.
Great insight, Teresa. Thank you. So let's take a look at we talked a little about the increase, but let's dig a little deeper into that 67% increase. So I think you and I agree that 67% feels a little low. So we're going to say we know it's higher. And it's probably due to tracking and how folks are tracking. But here, what we see, I want to really call everyone's attention to the baseline from 2024. So when you look at what it would be the bottom graph and look at what has increased in the increased a lot bucket, that's pretty significant, right? So not only do we know there's an increase even year over year, but increased a lot. So organizations are saying, yes, we saw an increase, but large percentage saw a pretty significant one. So with that, I do think that a lot of this could be due to how they're tracking, how they're viewing things. What are your initial thoughts here on this bucket of increase, more specifically where it says it's a significant one?
I think a lot of institutions have put a lot of emphasis on improved tracking, and a lot of organizations have limits to those investments. But I do think it does come down to scams. And the kind of call to action, I think, to all financial institutions to do a better job of having a scam strategy, reporting out on scam activity, and inability for us to mutually authenticate, a financial institution with a customer and a customer with the financial institution really have largely attributed to that increase.
I love that you put a call to action in there. Did not tee up Teresa, but we are going to dig into scams a little bit here in a few slides. So we'll hold that because I think that's a really important topic. When we think about the 91% of decision makers, we know that they agreed AI is being used. But then let's dig into when it comes to the fraud tactics that they are concerned about, right? And how fraudsters will use AI. Synthetic is still leading the pack here. And on the one hand, I understand because it is the broad data and how quickly it can be pulled together, and as you indicated earlier, very sophisticated, right? So I understand that, but I am surprised that deepfakes is at five because I will tell you, and Teresa, you probably have these conversations too in the industry. That question is raised a lot. In that, what are you seeing in deepfakes? How are the tools working? Who is best in class? That those are very consistent questions. So with that, what are your initial thoughts on, where these buckets land? And do you think that there would be, which one would you expect to see at number one, or isn't synthetic for this question?
Yeah, I definitely think smishing and vishing, I would have expected to be number one here. I wonder if I kind of wonder how they're tying specifically AI to the creation of the synthetic identity, and if it's just based on volume and scale of attack, and how they're the respondents responded to this particular question.
That's a fair point, and that's what's always really challenging, right? In that, is someone's reading through it, their interpretation. But I think what we could probably agree on is even when you look at probably, well, really, I could probably go all the way down the line and say all six, that from an AI perspective, it is the vast amounts of data pulling it together. And when we get into the smishing and vishing, to your point, making it seem, now they pulled together more data to make it more real. They know more about the individual, whether it's from an account takeover perspective, social engineering. So, really, at the end of the day, all of these will remain a top concern throughout 2026.
Absolutely.
Sarah,
Just
can I
think
just jump in
again,
real quick with a
of
question?
course.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we're gonna save most questions for the end, but a couple people have asked, and maybe it's worth clarifying now. If you could define synthetic versus first party fraud.
Absolutely. Great question. So think of first party fraud as if I myself opened a bank account with the intent to defraud the bank. I used all of my real information, and my goal was to deposit a fraudulent check, take out the funds, and the check charged back, leaving the financial institution with the loss. Uh, in theory, again, first party, it's the intent. So someone is using all of their real information. Think of synthetic as someone is not using, it is a conglomeration of data. So a real social might be real information, but when you put the pieces together, it could be my social, some of Teresa's information, in pulling different data points together to really create a fake identity. Mike, happy to answer if there's any follow-up questions. I'll continue moving on, but if there's any follow-up questions, please let me know related to that. So, as we think about innovations and fraud prevention, so we know that there's challenges. Everyone on the call is probably facing those today. But with that comes innovation, investment, and what does that look like? So, one of the things that we asked in this survey, right, is the organizational investment into AI and how it's changed in the past year. I will say this is a topic that is probably anyone I speak to in the industry. This is a hot topic. And so when you think about, really looking at this 82% increase to say a little, a lot, that's not necessarily surprising over the past year. I think that is where I would expect to see that number. What I do think is interesting is, there's buckets down below that too that are saying stayed the same, decreased, which is fascinating. So as we think, Teresa, we know 82% throughout 2025, but let's think about 2026. What do you foresee happening? That 82% bucket, do you think that will start to even out? Or do you think there's still a large bucket of folks that are not included in the 82% yet, and we'll continue to see mass investments into this space?
I do think there will be additional investments on the AI side. Not necessarily so much investment that there will not be a human in the loop, but there are so many processes that can be enhanced using AI that I think that we're really just, scratching the surface on. Um, you know, Identifying fraud trends using AI quicker, refinement of fraud strategies, and then from an operational side, giving recommendations on next steps that a frontline associate can take, generating notes and comments. All of that is really going to completely bring our fraud programs to the next level in making us more efficient, and really protecting our customers the way that they expect. I mean, it's kind of a fight AI with AI kind of scenario.
So, Teresa, when I think about this 82% bucket, and as you alluded to, there's a lot. We're scratching the surface. That's the exciting part, right? Is that there's so much that AI can help with those redundant tasks, those mundane tasks. But also, what are you seeing and hearing in the industry as part of that 82%? What is it that is the actual top investment for fraud prevention that you're hearing folks invest into?
A lot of it is on the operational side. However, I do think there's a lot of how can we provide tips in session to a customer when they're doing something that's risky to help them protect themselves. So, a lot of kind of discussions on how we can provide, I feel like a broken record talking about scams so much, but the appropriate scam warnings to a customer prior to them hitting submit. And really helping kind of provide that guidance while the customer is, performing that particular transaction. But tons on the operational side as well, for sure, as well as on the dispute side, helping customers kind of walk through disputing a transaction, to kind of reduce some of the back end needing to reach out to customers for additional information, or helping to guide them when they might be choosing something in a workflow that doesn't really make sense to the transaction that they're disputing.
Which then really hones in on that experience component, right?
That's
Which not,
right.
not only helps operational, but really helps the customer as well. So, I have to ask, we see this 82%. What I see is, and what I'm hearing, buckets being allocated to AI investment, a lot of organizations stating, going through and assessing where they're already using AI, where they want to use AI. But also, there's this component of challenges as it relates to AI, right? So, some banks saying, we want to invest, we know we should invest, but the sheer adoption, what it may entail, there's still hesitation. They want to do it, but there's still hesitation. Are you hearing that as well on your side?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more of a focus now to the adoption than the hesitation. But there are obviously downsides to using AI and a lot of governance around AI. Which is why I think, it's important to kind of consider, where you might be getting some pushback, that these are, using it for recommendations versus actually decisions. So kind of keeping that human in the loop so that, as you are deploying AI solutions, you're also still having a human put eyes on it and make sure that that recommendation actually makes sense. So I think that's also why I think we're seeing a lot of implementations on the operational side of the process, because there are still people ultimately looking at the output of the AI and making decisions.
So really honing in on the guidance component, right? To help the guidance there, the humans will remain, right? And I think that's what you hear time and time again, that it's not necessarily focusing to replace, right? It is helping to make those tasks easier. We're going to help customers as well. So let's jump over to scams, because we've heard scams a few times. This is Teresa, not necessarily planned that Teresa is talking about scams, but I love that you brought it up, because one of the things that Alloy takes a look at is, we've been talking about our state of fraud survey, and that's really coming from a bank leader perspective and what they're seeing. But equally as important is what consumers are saying, right? Because it is the voice of the consumer that will help to drive those decisions. So just a few months ago, Alloy surveyed 2,000 US adults on the state of scams and understanding what is most important to them, where do they see challenges, what are they looking for, even in a financial institution. And here are the results. So, you know, leading the pack here at a very strong 97% is fraud prevention and security measures. That's fantastic, right? That's really good for folks in our space. We love that consumers recognize it, but also surprising, because I think consumers have come on this journey along with financial institutions and the media, in that prevention and security matters, and it is that moment of truth. And so I'm a little surprised, even though it's great that 97% is leading the pack here. But also, you start to go down through the pack and you see customer service fees are tied there. We'll dig into the online component here in a moment. Teresa, what are your thoughts on the initial top responses there.
I love it. I really love it. I love that customers are really seeing fraud secure and security at the top of their list of things that are really important to them. I think customers are beginning to see fraud controls as more than just a hindrance to them being able to move their money and interact with a bank or a financial institution, and really seeing the focus on, keeping them safe. And I think as long as, there's transparency around some of those fraud controls, limits, and things of that nature, customers do appreciate that a lot more. I think we've heard a lot of feedback around Zelle where customers are in a lot of cases getting asked some additional questions about Zelle transactions that they're performing. And they really kind of appreciate the fact that the financial institution is taking those extra steps to make sure that their transaction is in fact safe. So I absolutely, love this number. I will be using this number in quite a number of our fraud related initiatives, and we've seen the same. We've seen the same in some independent surveys that we've done as well, where a lot of people don't think of this as a primary drawer of new customers and primacy. However, customers are saying that this is something that they're really interested in, and kind of goes back to how do we offer fraud prevention as a service to customers?
I love that. I love the way you're thinking about it. I love its fraud as a service to customers. And also, for others on the call, take this data and use it in your business case to other leaders. That is one thing I hear time and time again, or see people taking pictures so that they can use it, because I think that education, even across internal organizations, to make sure that those who aren't living and breathing this every day, they know where consumers stand and what consumers are looking at. Incredibly important topic. The one I do want to call out too, though, is the 94% rank the ease of doing business through online as a top emphasis. Uh, but then you have proximity to branches, rounding out here at 83%. We know that the branch network is strong, but in certainly there's some generational component there as well, on how different generations and individuals, how they like to bank. But what we still see in the industry is the what you offer in the branch. How do you offer that also online? And so I think it's great as banks continue to look at whether it's raising disputes and submitting disputes online, whether it is changing information online. That all comes with a risk. If you have the right risk controls, that's great. But is that the same thing you're seeing and hearing? Any differences there?
I do think that that is what I am hearing. So this doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, customers really want that omni-channel experience. They want to be able to do things the way that they prefer to do them and have those capabilities available across all channels. So at times, customers may feel more comfortable going into a branch or speaking to somebody to complete an action. Other times, they do not want to take those steps and they want to be able to do that in a more digital way. So important that, when we're offering the omni-channel experience, that we are, you know, taking account of all of that from a fraud viewpoint, making sure that there's the appropriate visibility across all of those channels to make sure that we're preventing fraudulent activity because we do have all of that visibility.
Yeah, that is a fantastic call out, right? The visibility component, and meeting people and your customers where they are at, because where they're at in their journey and how they want to bank, you want to make sure that that is also available to them. So we know that there's great innovations. Let's take a look at some of the innovations that folks have done over the past year and what has had the greatest impact on reducing fraud rates. Uh, Sure, I love to see that implementing an identity and fraud prevention platform is right at the top at 33%. But when you really look at the top three pieces there, right? So totaling 67% from a platform to point solutions to building an own in-house, which I'm going to guess that's also a platform of some sort. You know, at the end of the day, those are investments into technology and tools, right? So while the remaining items are also important, it's a different type of investment. Fraud education will continue. No one is going to stop that anytime soon. That is a critical component of any fraud program. But also the piece of humans that, you know, throwing bodies isn't always necessarily the solution. It's giving everyone the tools to really help them in their fraud prevention journey. So when we look at this 33% and then, again, the 67%, why do you think identity and, again, not point solutions, but that platform approach is leading the pack there?
I think it's because it really does allow for the change it for fraud practitioners to move at the same speed as the fraudsters. Also allows us to deploy new products and services quicker with the right controls. So having our data centralized allows faster reaction, the ability to consider various attributes of a customer, rather than just looking at that specific activity that's happening, and more broadly looking at the customer as a whole is super important. Uh, Fraud controls can be deployed with more ease. We can manage identity from onboarding and then throughout the customer journey. I think that that's, everybody's goal is to be able to really know who their customer is. And, the ability to add that in session friction when it's necessary. And a fraud platform really allows for that.
Gosh, Teresa, you hit on so many points in there that are so good. Identity and who someone is, it's really at the heart of what you're doing at any given point in time, right? Because it is very difficult to predict their intentions. But if you start to look at what they are doing in comparison to their peers, and really you're starting to get to know who they are and how they bank, critical component there. And also the idea of what may work today may not work tomorrow. And so I love that folks are making investments into platforms because it's really the future, right? You have to be able to be very nimble in this space. We would love to say always be proactive, but sometimes you do have to quickly react to those trends. And if the platform is there, that will allow you to do that. What I do want to call out, I was looking at this statistic and I was also looking at the stats from last year. More specifically, when we did the survey, 64% of respondents reported plans to invest in identity risk solutions in 2025. Now we see 33% indicating they implemented, and that's had a significant benefit to them. And so one may assume that there's 31% still actively implementing and probably more, but love to see that it's there's a benefit there. There's the ROI, and it's really there's change being made.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I
Teresa,
definitely
as we
see that
think,
number. And yeah, I'm sorry.
yeah, no,
I
go,
absolutely
yeah,
see
for
that
sure.
number increasing and more financial institution really realizing the benefit of those point solution, the benefit of a platform over a point solution. Point solutions are just a little bit more siloed, fragmented, and just lack that scalability and the ability to kind of bring in new vendors a little bit sooner into your platform. It really enables you to do that very easily. And even champion challenge some of those vendor solutions to see what works best for your institution and your customers.
Teresa, I that is so well said. I could not agree more. And I think I'll just pause there because that was so well said. And really making the investment and as you said, champion challenge. Because what again may work for others may not work for you, and you really have to understand what's going to work for you and where the benefits are. We talked a lot about fraud prevention. We touched on scams. Let's look at some responses on how investments are showing ROI. Because if we go back in time and we think about fraud investments being made, I mean, they were hard dollars. What was the hard dollar impact you would put in those business cases, right? But related specifically to fraud, right? But there's this shift, there is this convergence of business growth, customer trust, revenue acquisition as it relates to consumers. And I think that is a really important piece to take away from even today. And, I'll give everyone a moment to read through these stats. This was just a really exciting point for me this year. 92% indicate fraud prevention has really helped them to grow their business, right? We talked a little bit about quantity over quality, but you start to look at the risk versus reward. And I think what this stat shows is the fraud and risk teams working very closely with their line of business partners to be in lockstep, because what line of business wants to achieve, fraud and risk teams should know. And I think that really is going to help from an acquisition standpoint. And I'll touch briefly on this customer trust. Teresa, you hit on it, right? In that the customer trust, the customer loyalty, 9 in 10 consider fraud prevention a key driver of customer trust. There is a moment of truth. And whether it is a consumer who has been impacted by a scam, maybe their account has been taken over, was it detected? And if it wasn't detected, or maybe it was, what is the organizational response to that? And then you round out with 79% indicating that they've seen fraud prevention lead to greater willingness to purchase more products. I mean, if that's not a win for fraud and risk teams, right? I don't know what is. So, Teresa, that was a lot, but let me just pause for your initial response. Does this align with what you're thinking and what you've seen in surveys and your thoughts?
It does. I mean, I think that we've all seen it. Customers that have been hit by a fraud event that doesn't get detected and the attrition that happens thereafter. Customers lose their faith in their financial institution. And if they're having to open up new accounts anyway, they're not opening up their new accounts with you. So we see this happen very frequently, which is why I do think, this does absolutely ring true.
That's great. I think this is another really good statistic that if folks are building business cases, will use the data to really help in what you're looking for from an investment standpoint and the changes you want to make internally. Mike, I'm going to flip it over to you because I believe we have another poll coming up.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. Yes. So everyone, we've got our second and final poll here. And same drill as before, I'm going to read the question and read through the answers here, and hopefully that'll give folks some time to make their selection. So the question is, have you been able to measure the impact fraud prevention efforts have on growth? And would be yes, we've seen a significant increase. Yes, we've seen a moderate increase. No, we have not seen a larger increase, or no, we've seen a decrease. So hold it open just for another couple of minutes. We've we've got about 10 minutes left to the top of the hour. I don't want to hold off the poll too long because I know we've got those predictions coming, which are always good to hear, and also hopefully we'll take a couple questions. But just a reminder, everyone, if we don't get to a question you've asked, we'll definitely follow up after the program. So just keep those questions coming in. We really want to hear from you. All right, cool. We've got again a really nice percentage of our audience is weighing in on this. So let me hold up in one more moment, and then I will share it right now. Here we go. All right, let's see. So leading the pack, yes, we've seen a moderate increase, 43%, and then 36% say no, we have not seen a larger increase. Kind of interesting. 19% say we've seen a significant increase, and 3% say we've seen a decrease. So thank you, everyone, for those results, for those answers. Sarah, again, let me just kick it over to you and ask, what do you think? In line with your expectations or not?
Yeah, definitely in line with my expectations, especially if I group the yes, right? Then we're looking at a 62% increase there. I am surprised at the 36% though. So even though I expected to see that increase, you'd be well over 60%. Um, maybe I just expected that increase to be a little larger than and have that no answer go down a little bit. Teresa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just a little bit difficult to measure. So I think, how does your organization actually measure the fraud control environment's impact to the ability to grow? I know that we have definitely been able to see growth through implementing the right fraud controls with new offers of products and services. So we've been able to take riskier deci- riskier decisions and really put in the right controls so that we are doing so mindfully and safely. But it's not always very easy to kind of measure the impact of the fraud control environment on your overall customer growth.
Yeah, that direct correlation can be hard
Yeah.
to, yeah, to match up. That makes sense. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I'll leave a minute or two for questions. But I want to get to the predictions for 2026. So we've talked a lot about AI throughout this session, and Teresa, one question for you. We know AI, it is here, it is here to stay, it is the tip of the iceberg. And really organizations taking a step back to see how they can use it, where they want to make investments. You've talked a lot about even some of those top investments. If there is an organization or a department leader and they don't know where to start, what would you recommend to them? What would be your top recommendation on what they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can start really small. So there's a lot of really low risk AI capabilities that just help teams with organization, email management, presentations, even. And these are not necessarily fraud focused. However, they do add capacity back. So these are, not customer facing. So they don't have the same levels of risk as some of the more customer facing AI strategies that can be put in place. I think that that is, an easy way to start. And then I also already mentioned kind of keeping the human in the loop. So you do not need to take that huge jump where AI is making decisions for you. You can really kind of continue to have a person involved in those decisions, which I think makes people feel a little bit more comfortable around the use of AI.
Because any time back in a leader fraud risk area is a huge win. So anytime back in their day for them
Right.
to
So
dig deeper
valuable.
into those cues, so valuable. One of the things that we're looking at from a prediction standpoint, identity remains a priority. Identity, we've definitely seen a shift. Identity, more and more organizations saying, yes, identity is at the heart of what we are doing. We're also seeing this shift. Not only is it the core, but we're seeing this shift from an authentication, identity, fraud, really all of them coming together, right? If we go back decades ago, we had the fraud and AML, FRAML, right? That all came together. We're seeing the silos being broken down. So, really looking at how do you know if your authentication is working? We can measure it against our identity tools. We can look at our fraud cases, right? Really looking at this holistic picture. Teresa, is this something you are seeing in the industry? What are your thoughts here?
Ab- Absolutely. I think that the persistence of identity throughout that customer journey, as I already mentioned, is so important for fraud teams to keep an eye on. Having that unified view of your customer and making sure that, as a fraud team, you are talking to your authentication teams and you're really connected with them as well as your payment teams. So important to the overall fraud prevention strategy that you are deploying.
Great advice there. And, love that insight because I agree. I think we'll see more and more of that moving forward. The final prediction we have here is fraud controls enable growth. We've talked a lot about this throughout the session in that the stronger controls you have, it allows you to really offer those products so that fraud is not putting up the stop sign to say, you cannot launch that new product because we don't have the right fraud control, or you cannot launch a type of real time payment because we don't have the right fraud control. So, knowing some of these feature functionality product can all help to drive growth. We expect that not only continue, but really that intersection to really permeate more than what it is now. Teresa, you've talked a lot about it. We know it's hard to track, right? Based on, some of your guidance here. So if someone is having a challenge in working with maybe their line of business partner or being able to track that, what would you recommend? Where do they start? Where should they go? What are some top ideas on how to get this moving?
I think it's really making sure that fraud's at the table in pre-discovery conversations with your product partners to really understand what those risks are and what those mitigating controls could be. And having a very layered approach to that. I know that we're doing a lot of work around, having fraud controls behind switches and configurable so that you can also adjust them and remove them if you're finding that you're creating too much of a friction and the products are not being um, adopted in the way that we expected. So I would say just making sure that you're speaking with your partners, that you're connected with the new the teams that are looking to deploy these new products early on in the process, and remaining a stakeholder in those discussions throughout the project.
So really, Teresa, it really comes down to that consistency being key and having, being flexible and nimble because again, you may think you know what works, but then that changes. And with customers, members being at the heart of it, you want to be able to quickly maneuver as needed without sacrificing the risk.
Absolutely.
Great. So we have just a few minutes for questions. So, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions that you have seen come through.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, we do have some good questions. And we'll just let's hit a couple of them here before the top of the hour. So first one is, and Sarah, I'll just direct it to you, but please, Teresa, just jump in. Do you believe that small business trends are similar to consumer fraud numbers? I guess that's more for you, Sarah,
I
based on
do.
the survey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do. In fact, there is some data in the survey. So if you download that, there is some data in the survey that talks about the increase in not only the consumer side, but business as well. I think not only small business, we see it on the commercial side. So with that increase, great question. But yes, I would definitely include small business in the increase as well.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Next question here. Aside from customer education and outreach, are there any recommendations or solutions to spoof call related fraud, where the customer receives a call spoofed to look like it's originating from the FI, and the customer is coerced into giving their PII and account card information to the scammer?
I'll give my response, and then Teresa, I'll tap you in too. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So first, I would just say yes. One, you're spot on that the education and outreach will remain as you stated, right? That will be a consistent theme that has to continue. But I also think there are solutions out there. There are tools out there that you can layer in to help there as well. And really looking at from a carrier perspective, if there are components where it is in app, and is that actual consumer in app as they are on the phone with you? So many different things there. Teresa, what are your thoughts on that question as well?
Yeah, no, just agree. There are definitely vendors that provide that service. But it is so important to continue to have a layered approach to your strategy. Um, just because, even with the best anti spoofing technology, customers may still fall for those scams. So just important to have that layered approach, and not ever rely on a singular control as your godsends to prevent all of that type of activity.
We should have that in quotes, Teresa. No, do not rely on a singular control.
Well, I think that is a great note to wrap up on here. We are just right at the top of the hour, and we always are well aware that so many folks have got something else they've got to turn to right away at the top of the hour. So we've covered a lot of ground today. Really great information. Really some really kind of some startling data there from that survey. So I want to thank Sarah and Teresa both for your time and expertise today, and of course everyone in the audience for being here. Definitely appreciate your time and participation in those polls. And we, as I said, we'll follow up with questions that we did not get to. There were a lot here that we weren't able to get to in the time we had today. So thank you for asking those questions. And we'll also be sending you a follow-up email the next day or two that'll have a link to a recording of this event. So please keep an eye out for that. And with that, I will wrap it up. Wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you'll join us again here very soon. Thanks so much.